The sirens cut through the night air as red and blue lights flooded my front yard. I stood frozen on my porch, watching federal agents swarm the warehouse at the edge of my property. The same warehouse I had been fighting the HOA about for months. The same warehouse they insisted was perfectly legal. The lead agent approached me, his face grim in the harsh light. "Sir, you were right. This is not just a community storage facility," he said, his voice low. "What we found inside, this is part of an interstate operation." Behind him, I could see them bringing out crate after crate, serial numbers, expensive equipment, all of it stolen, all of it hidden right here on the land that had been in my family for generations. The land they tried to take from me with paperwork tricks and dismissive smiles. The HOA president was being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage as he spotted me watching. That is when I realized the truth. Sometimes, fighting for what is yours uncovers secrets that powerful people will do anything to keep buried. Morning light filtered through the oak trees that lined the eastern edge of my property. The same trees my grandfather planted when he first built this house 50 years ago. I loved walking this land at dawn, coffee in hand, listening to the world wake up. This 5-acre plot had been my sanctuary since I inherited it 3 years ago after my grandfather passed. He always told me, "Land is the only thing they cannot make more of. Protect it with everything you have." The neighborhood around me had changed dramatically over the decades. What once was a collection of large rural properties had gradually been subdivided and developed into Oakwood Estates, a pristine planned community with identical houses and perfectly manicured lawns. My property remained the only holdout, a wild island in a sea of conformity. The Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association never approved of my existence. I was not technically within their jurisdiction, but that did not stop Diane Harrington, the HOA president, from leaving notices on my mailbox about overgrown grass or suggesting I might consider selling to a developer who could better utilize the space. I ignored them all. This land was mine. The deed was clear. The property lines were established decades before the development existed, or so I thought. It started with a fence. I noticed it one Tuesday morning in April. A sleek black metal barrier had appeared overnight, cutting about 20 feet into what I knew was my property line. I immediately called the HOA office and was told curtly that the fence was within community guidelines and that I should consult my property documents if I had concerns. The next day, the construction trucks arrived. Heavy machinery, concrete mixers, workers in hard hats unloading steel beams. They were building something big, something permanent, and they were building it on my land. I marched over to the construction site, property documents in hand. The foreman barely glanced at them. "We have permits, buddy. Take it up with the county if you have a problem." He pointed to a laminated sheet tacked to a temporary office trailer. The permit showed clearance for a community storage facility, with the Oakwood Estates HOA listed as the owner. That afternoon, I drove straight to the HOA office, a small brick building near the neighborhood entrance. Diane Harrington sat behind her desk, pearl necklace gleaming, not bothering to stand when I entered. Her assistant hovered nervously in the corner. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, my name sounding like an inconvenience in her mouth. "How can the association help you today?" "You are building on my property," I said, placing my deed and survey documents on her desk. "That fence and whatever you are constructing is at least 20 feet over the line." She glanced at my papers without touching them. "Our community plans and county approvals indicate that area is part of common land designated for neighborhood use. Your documents must be outdated." These are the original property lines, I insisted, from before your development even existed. She smiled thinly. The Redevelopment Commission approved our plans 5 years ago. Whatever your grandfather thought he owned may have changed during rezoning. No one informed me of any rezoning, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Perhaps you should have attended the community meetings, she replied, standing to indicate our conversation was over. The warehouse will be completed on schedule. It is all perfectly legal, Mr. Reynolds. Good day. I filed complaints with the county. I called the permit office. I even tried to speak with other board members. Each time I hit the same wall of dismissal. No one seemed concerned that a 3-story warehouse was being built partially on private property. The construction continued at breakneck speed, as if they were racing against the possibility that someone might actually listen to me. Every morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. Every evening, I watched as more of my land disappeared beneath concrete and steel. I felt powerless, steamrolled by people who viewed my inheritance as nothing but an inconvenience to their plans. But something about the speed of construction, the dismissiveness of every official, and the strange security measures I noticed being installed made me suspicious. This was not just about storage. No one builds a warehouse that quickly, with that level of security, just to store holiday decorations and extra furniture. Something was not right, and I was not going to stop until I found out what they were really building on my land. The county recorder's office smelled of old paper and dust. I had taken a day off work to dig through property records, determined to find where their claim to my land originated. The clerk, an older woman named Martha, seemed surprised by my persistence as I requested file after file of land, surveys, and deeds dating back 50 years. Not many people care this much about property lines anymore, she commented, placing another heavy binder in front of me. Most folks just trust what they are told these days. My grandfather did not trust easily, I replied. He taught me to verify everything in writing. By midday, buried in the back of a folder from 15 years prior, I found it. A small clerical error in a rezoning document. When the original Oakwood development was approved, someone had mistakenly drawn a property line 20 feet into my grandfather's land. The error was small enough to miss, especially since my grandfather had a fence well within his actual property line, leaving a stretch of unused land between. The HOA had found this paperwork error and exploited it. They had not stolen my land through official channels. They had simply found an overlooked mistake and decided it was enough justification to build. I photocopied everything and drove straight to Thomas Ramirez, a retired neighbor who had lived adjacent to my property for decades. Thomas had always been friendly but kept to himself. I found him tending to his garden, his hands dark with soil. They pulled the same trick with the Johnsons 3 years ago, he told me after I explained my situation. Claimed 2 acres of their back lot for a community green space. The Johnsons fought it for a while, then gave up and moved. Why did no one else speak up? I asked. Thomas wiped his hands on his jeans. The HOA here, they have ways of making problems for people who cause trouble. Selective enforcement of rules, sudden inspections, fines for violations no one else gets cited for. Most folks just want a quiet life, you know. Over the next week, I spoke with other longtime residents. Each had a story. A fence moved a few feet, land redistributed for community use. Aggressive fines until people fell in line. The pattern was clear. The HOA, under Diane's leadership, had been steadily expanding their control through intimidation and paperwork manipulation. I contacted 5 different lawyers. Each gave me the same response after reviewing my case. Technically, you might be right, but fighting an established HOA would cost more than the strip of land is worth. The paperwork error gives them just enough standing to tie this up in court for years. The last attorney was brutally honest. Look, son, even if you win, you will spend $30,000 minimum in legal fees to reclaim a piece of land worth maybe $10,000. Cut your losses. But this was not about money. This was my grandfather's land, land he had protected, land he had entrusted to me. One evening, as I documented the nearly completed warehouse from the edge of my property, I noticed Diane and a man I did not recognize examining the building. I moved closer, keeping hidden behind a stand of trees. The units in the back will be kept locked at all times, the man was saying. No community access, no questions. And the board gets the agreed percentage, Diane asked. Deposited monthly as discussed. Just make sure no one gets curious about what goes in or out, especially that guy. The man nodded in the direction of my house. Reynolds is all talk, Diane replied dismissively. He cannot afford a real fight and no one will back him. This will all blow over once the facility is operational. They moved inside, their voices fatting. I stood frozen, my suspicions crystallizing into something darker. This was not just about land anymore. Something was going to be stored in that warehouse, something they needed to keep secret. That night, I spread all my evidence across my dining room table. Property documents, photographs, notes from conversations. It was not enough to prove anything illegal, but it showed a pattern of deliberate deception. I felt like David facing Goliath, armed with only paper and suspicion against an organization with money and influence. But David won that fight, and so would I. The warehouse was completed by early June. A stark gray structure with minimal windows and security cameras mounted at each corner. They held a ribbon-cutting ceremony that I was notably not invited to. From my kitchen window, I watched board members in pressed clothes applaud as Diane cut a red ribbon stretched across the main entrance. Their faces beamed with pride, community achievement, neighborhood progress, all built on stolen land. For 2 weeks, I observed the building from a distance. During daylight hours, residents would occasionally drop off or retrieve items from the front section, seasonal decorations, furniture, the expected contents of a community storage space. But the back section, nearly half the building, remained locked. No resident access, no explanation of its purpose. I noticed patterns in security. A guard checked the building every 3 hours during the day. At night, it dropped to once every 5 hours. Between 2:00 and 3:00 a.m., there was a consistent gap in coverage. I documented everything, building a case while searching for my opening. On a moonless Tuesday night, I made my move. Dressed in dark clothes, I approached from the wooded area behind the warehouse. A section of fence had been hastily installed, with a loose panel I had noticed during my observations. I slipped through silently, crossing the open space to the building's rear-loading dock in quick, low movements. The back entrance had a keypad lock, but I had no intention of trying to break it. Instead, I focused on a ground-level window I had spotted, likely a bathroom or utility closet based on its size. It was unlocked. Sloppy security or overconfidence. Either way, it was my way in. The window opened into a small maintenance room. I climbed through carefully, using my phone's flashlight on its dimmest setting to navigate. The air inside was cool and stale, heavy with the smell of new construction and something else, motor oil and electronics. I made my way through a narrow corridor into the main storage area. The front section looked exactly as expected, numbered units with padlocks, containing the everyday overflow of suburban lives. Nothing suspicious, nothing worth hiding. A heavy fire door separated this public space from the restricted area. It should have been locked, but someone had propped it slightly open with a folded piece of cardboard, perhaps a maintenance worker forgetting to secure it properly. Their mistake was my opportunity. Beyond the door, the warehouse transformed. No numbered storage units here. Instead, rows of sealed wooden crates and metal containers lined the concrete floor. Some were large enough to hold furniture. Others were smaller, reinforced with metal bands. All had identification numbers stenciled on their sides, along with origin codes that referenced multiple states: Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Ohio. Against the far wall stood a desk with a computer and a filing cabinet. I moved toward it, careful to make no sound. The top drawer contained nothing of interest: office supplies, maintenance logs. The second drawer held what I was looking for: a shipping manifest. I photographed each page methodically. The entries were coded, but patterns emerged. Items listed as client materials with delivery schedules and mysterious designations like Route 3 and clean papers. Some entries were marked high priority pickup with premium charges noted. Near the back of the warehouse, I discovered a separate room secured with a much more sophisticated lock than the rest of the building. Through its small window, I could see more valuable items: electronics still in retail packaging, power tools, and what appeared to be automotive parts, all arranged in neat rows. I heard a noise from outside, the crunch of tires on gravel, security returning earlier than expected. I quickly took final photographs of the room and several crate serial numbers, then retraced my steps. I slipped out the window and made it back to the fence just as headlights swept across the parking lot. I was through the loose panel and into the tree line before the guard had even exited his vehicle. Back home, heart still pounding, I began cross-referencing the serial numbers I had photographed. Most led nowhere, but one, from a crate marked with an Illinois origin code, matched a police report for construction equipment stolen from a worksite near Chicago 3 months earlier. The serial number was listed in a database of stolen property. I sat back, my suspicion now confirmed by hard evidence. The warehouse was not just a storage facility. It was a transit point for stolen goods, a laundering operation disguised as a community service. And the HOA board, whether willing participants or useful idiots, had provided the perfect cover. This was bigger than my property line now, more dangerous too. I was no longer just a disgruntled neighbor fighting a land dispute. I had evidence of criminal activity, evidence that could make powerful people very uncomfortable. The land they had taken from me had become the foundation for something illegal. And now I had to decide what to do with this knowledge. Go to the police immediately with what might be dismissed as circumstantial evidence, or dig deeper, build a stronger case, and ensure that when they fell hard. I chose the latter because some fights are worth doing right. The morning after my warehouse excursion, I carefully reviewed all the evidence I had gathered. The photos were clear, the serial numbers documented, the manifest pages legible. It would be easy to take this to the police now. But something held me back. Instinct, perhaps, or the nagging fear that without more concrete proof, this could all be explained away. A stolen serial number could be dismissed as a recording error. A manifest with coded entries could be given innocent explanations. I needed more. I needed patterns. I needed to catch them in the act. I drove to a hunting supply store 2 towns over and purchased a high-quality trail camera designed for wildlife observation. It was weather-resistant, motion-activated and capable of night vision recording. The perfect tool for unobtrusive surveillance. That night, I installed it in a large oak tree that offered a clear view of the warehouse's rear loading dock. I positioned it carefully, camouflaged among the branches, its lens barely visible even if you knew where to look. Then I waited. The first week yielded little of interest. The usual guard checks, maintenance workers, nothing suspicious. But on the 8th night at approximately 1:30 a.m., the camera captured what I had been waiting for, a large unmarked truck backing up to the loading dock. 4 men worked quickly to unload crates similar to those I had seen inside. No logos on their clothing. No markings on the vehicle beyond a mud-smeared license plate that was conveniently unreadable. They were gone within 20 minutes, the entire operation executed with practiced efficiency. 2 nights later, a different truck arrived. Same procedure, same efficiency, same type of crates. But the most interesting discovery came when I reviewed footage from the following morning. A panel van arrived at 5:45 a.m. before the neighborhood was fully awake. A man I recognized as Gerald Jenkins, Diane's brother, supervised as select items were loaded into the van. He was not a resident of Oakwood Estates. He had no official connection to the HOA. Yet here he was, with unrestricted access to the secured area of the warehouse. I began researching Gerald Jenkins. Public records showed he owned a small import-export business based in Cincinnati, about 60 miles away. His company, Jenkins Global Solutions, had been cited twice for permit violations, but never charged with anything serious. His social media presence was minimal, but what existed showed connections to several freight forwarding companies across the Midwest. The county business registry provided the final piece of the puzzle. The warehouse, though officially owned by the Oakwood Estates HOA, was leased through a management company called JGS Properties, LLC. A shell company with Gerald Jenkins listed as the principal. Diane had never disclosed this connection to the community. I established a routine of downloading footage every 3 days, cataloging trucks, timing, and whatever I could capture of the items being moved. I noted license plates when visible and faces when the camera caught them clearly. I created a secure cloud backup of everything. During this time, I discovered something else interesting. A secondary entrance to the warehouse property that bypassed the main neighborhood gates entirely. A small access road connected to a service route behind the development, allowing vehicles to come and go without passing through the guarded community entrance. The perfect setup for moving items you did not want anyone to see. By the end of the month, I had documented 14 nighttime deliveries and 9 early morning departures. I had identified Gerald Jenkins on site 6 times. I had clear images of items being moved that matched descriptions of stolen property from police reports across 3 states. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report: photographs, dates, times, connections between the HOA and Jenkins, property records showing the land encroachment, and the matching serial numbers from stolen items. I made 3 copies, one for the local police, one for the FBI field office in Cincinnati, which handled interstate theft, and one hidden securely as insurance. But I did not submit them yet. Timing would be crucial. I needed to catch them all together to ensure no one could claim ignorance or pin everything on a rogue operator. I needed to witness their collective involvement. The opportunity arrived in the form of a certified letter in my mailbox. The HOA was fining me $500 for unauthorized proximity to community property and suspicious behavior. They had spotted me taking photographs of the warehouse from the edge of my property. The letter required my presence at the next board meeting to address these concerning activities. They thought they were putting me on the defensive. In reality, they were inviting me to the perfect stage for their downfall. Everything was falling into place. I had been patient. I had built my case methodically. Now it was time to trigger the collapse of their operation. As the date of the meeting approached, I finalized my preparations. I was no longer fighting just for my land. I was fighting for justice. The Oakwood Estates Community Center buzzed with unusual activity on the evening of the board meeting. More residents had shown up than for any previous gathering, drawn by rumors of important security announcements and new community guidelines. The room was arranged with precision, rows of folding chairs facing a long table where board members sat with practiced authority. I arrived exactly on time, dressed more formally than usual in slacks and a button-down shirt. I took a seat in the back row, nodding politely to neighbors who regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Everyone knew about my ongoing dispute with the HOA. Few had offered support. Diane called the meeting to order at 7:00 p.m. sharp, her voice carrying through the room with practiced confidence. Before we address specific cases, we have several important announcements regarding community security and property values. For the next 40 minutes, I sat quietly as the board unveiled new restrictions on everything from holiday decorations to visitor parking. They introduced higher fees for amenity usage and stricter architectural review guidelines. But the centerpiece of their presentation was the successful implementation of the community storage facility. My grandfather's stolen land transformed into their crowning achievement. The facility has been so successful, Diane announced with a smile, that the board has approved expansion plans for the coming fiscal year. As photos of the warehouse appeared on the presentation screen, I discreetly removed my phone and navigated to a pre-drafted email. Attached were all my files: the surveillance photos, property records, corporate connection documents linking Gerald Jenkins to the warehouse, and time-stamped evidence of after-hours activities. I had already entered the email addresses for the local police department's financial crimes unit, the FBI field office, and a contact at the regional news station's investigative team. While Diane detailed the community benefits of the storage facility, I pressed send. The evidence was now beyond their reach. At 8:15 p.m., Diane finally addressed the reason for my invitation. Now, regarding complaint 47B, unauthorized surveillance of community property by non-authorized personnel. She fixed me with a stern look. Mr. Reynolds, you have been observed taking photographs of the community storage facility and loitering near the security fence. This behavior has caused concern among residents. I stood, maintaining a calm demeanor. Thank you for your concern, Ms. Harrington. I was simply documenting the continuing encroachment on my property. As for loitering, I believe I was standing on land that legally belongs to me. I paused, then added, but I understand your concerns about security. I assure you I have no intention of interfering with the operations at the facility. Something in my tone must have alerted her. Her eyes narrowed slightly. We have permits and documentation showing the property boundaries. Your continued dispute is becoming disruptive. I agree this has gone on long enough, I said evenly. I am prepared to let proper authorities determine the outcome. The meeting continued with other business, but I noticed Diane checking her phone repeatedly, a growing tension in her posture. At 9:07 p.m., her phone rang. She stepped out to take the call. When she returned, her face had lost its color. I remained for the duration of the meeting. participating politely in discussions about landscaping improvements and pool maintenance. At 9:42 p.m., just as Diane was delivering closing remarks, the distant sound of sirens cut through the night air. The room fell silent. The sirens grew louder, clearly approaching the neighborhood. Diane's hand froze mid-gesture. Several board members exchanged worried glances. I stood casually. "It sounds like you may have more pressing matters to attend to. If you will excuse me, I think our business is concluded for tonight." As I walked out, the first police cruisers were turning into the development entrance, lights flashing. A news van was not far behind. By the time I reached the parking lot, multiple vehicles from different agencies were converging on the warehouse. Men in FBI windbreakers were already securing the perimeter. I drove home slowly, watching in my rearview mirror as the night erupted into controlled chaos. Floodlights illuminated the warehouse. Officers moved with purpose. Board members stood in confused clusters as agents approached them with identification badges displayed. From my front porch, I had a perfect view of the scene unfolding across my property line. I did not celebrate. I did not gloat. I simply watched as the truth I had carefully unearthed broke through to the surface, impossible to bury any longer. The fortress they had built on stolen ground was crumbling, and I had not had to throw a single stone. The morning after the raid, I awoke to the sound of helicopter rotors. News choppers hovered over the neighborhood, capturing aerial footage of federal agents cataloging evidence from the warehouse. My phone had begun ringing at 6:30 a.m., first local reporters, then regional news outlets, all seeking comment from the neighbor who uncovered the operation. I declined all interviews. This was not about publicity for me. But I did watch the news coverage with a strange sense of validation as the story unfolded throughout the day. The warehouse had indeed been a front for a sophisticated theft ring operating across multiple states. Stolen construction equipment, electronics, automotive parts, and other high-value items had been stored there temporarily before being redistributed with falsified documentation. The operation had been running for nearly 9 months, with estimated stolen goods valued at over $3 million. By midday, the first arrests were announced. Gerald Jenkins was taken into custody at his office in Cincinnati. 3 other men connected to the logistics operation were arrested at different locations. And most satisfying of all, Diane Harrington was led from her home in handcuffs, her perfectly coordinated outfit contrasting sharply with the gravity of her situation. The official statement from authorities indicated that 4 members of the 7-person HOA board had known about the illegal operation and had received regular payments for providing the location and maintaining secrecy. The other 3 board members appeared genuinely shocked and were cooperating fully with investigators. The neighborhood descended into chaos. Emergency community meetings were called. Residents demanded answers. Property values became an immediate concern as news vans lined the streets, and the Oakwood Estates sign became the backdrop for countless news reports about organized crime in suburban America. On the 3rd day, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Detective Sarah Lanning from the county sheriff's office, the lead local investigator working with federal authorities. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand, "I think it is time we had a formal conversation about your role in uncovering this operation." For the next 3 hours, I walked her through everything: the land dispute, my suspicions, the night I entered the warehouse, and my subsequent surveillance. I provided all original documentation and access to my cloud storage containing the evidence. "You took quite a risk," she noted, reviewing my photographs. "These people were connected to serious criminal enterprises." "They stole my land," I replied simply. "Everything else came from that first wrong." In the weeks that followed, I was interviewed by various law enforcement agencies. Each time I told the same straightforward story. I was not seeking recognition. I just wanted the truth on record. The remaining HOA board members resigned en masse. State regulators placed the association under receivership pending complete reorganization. The warehouse was sealed as a crime scene, with police tape marking off the building my grandfather had never wanted constructed. Neighbors who had previously avoided me now approached with apologies and expressions of support. Martha Wilson, who lived 2 doors down, brought me a homemade pie with a card that read, "Thank you for protecting our community from the people who claim to be protecting it." Thomas Ramirez visited one evening, sitting with me on my porch as we watched authorities continue their work at the warehouse. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "the Johnsons would have appreciated this, seeing someone finally stand up to them and win." "It was not just about winning," I replied. "It was about what was right." 6 weeks after the raid, I received official notification from the county. Following review of all property documents and the criminal investigation findings, the incorrect boundary designation had been revoked. The land was officially restored to my ownership, with the county issuing a formal apology for the oversight that had allowed the encroachment. Plans were made to demolish the warehouse once it was no longer needed as evidence. The land would be returned to its natural state, though I knew it would take years for the scars on the earth to fully heal. As the initial shock wore off and the media attention began to fade, I found myself reflecting on what had been lost in this battle. Peace of mind, trust in institutions, the simple joy of walking my property without thinking of conflict and deception. But I had gained something too, a certainty that standing against wrongdoing matters even when it seems futile. My grandfather had been right all along. Land is worth protecting, truth is worth uncovering, and some fights, no matter how daunting, are worth seeing through to the end. Autumn painted the trees in brilliant reds and golds as I stood at the edge of my property, watching the demolition crew make final preparations. 8 months had passed since the raid. The criminal trials were underway, with Gerald Jenkins and 2 of his associates already accepting plea deals in exchange for testimony against larger players in the theft ring. Diane and the other board members were awaiting trial for their roles in the scheme. The warehouse that had been the center of so much controversy stood empty now, evidence long since cataloged and removed. Today it would come down, erasing the most visible reminder of what had happened here. The demolition supervisor approached me, clipboard in hand. "We are ready when you are, sir. Since this section is now legally your property, we need your final authorization." I signed the form without hesitation. 10 minutes later, the machines roared to life. I watched with a strange mix of emotions as the walls came down, concrete crumbling, steel beams folding under mechanical force. By sunset, all that remained was a concrete slab that would be broken up and removed over the next few days. The land looked wounded, flat and barren where trees had once stood. But land, like people, can heal with time and care. The following weekend, I began the restoration process. I rented equipment and brought in topsoil to repair the damage done by heavy construction. I consulted with a local nursery about native plants that would thrive in this soil. and I planted the first row of saplings along what had once been the disputed property line. Oak trees, like the ones my grandfather had planted decades before. In the months that followed, the Oakwood Estates HOA underwent a complete transformation. A court-appointed administrator oversaw new elections, with strict oversight and transparency requirements. The new board, composed entirely of residents who had not been involved with the previous administration, approached their responsibilities with humility and openness. Jennifer Torres, the newly elected board president, requested a meeting with me 6 months after taking office. We sat at my kitchen table, a stark contrast to the formal community center where I had last confronted HOA leadership. "We are rewriting all the bylaws," she explained, pushing a draft document across the table. "And we wanted your input, especially regarding property boundaries and respect for historical land rights." "Why my input specifically?" I asked. She smiled ruefully. "Because you were right when everyone else either could not or would not see the truth. That kind of perspective is valuable." I reviewed their draft, offering suggestions based on what I had learned through my ordeal. The new bylaws included strict conflict of interest provisions, transparent financial reporting requirements, and clear limitations on the board's authority to enter into contracts or agreements without community approval. Spring arrived with new growth across my property. Where the warehouse had stood, I had created a garden with vegetables, herbs, and wildflowers. It was a small act of reclamation, transforming a space that had been used for deception into one that produced life and nourishment. 1 year to the day after the raid, I received an unexpected letter. It contained an invitation to a community ceremony where the sheriff's department would be presenting me with a Citizen Service Award for my role in uncovering the theft ring. The investigation had expanded well beyond our community, leading to arrests in 3 states and the recovery of millions in stolen property. I attended the ceremony, accepting the plaque with mixed emotions. Recognition had never been my goal. I had simply been fighting for what was mine. But standing there, seeing the appreciation in the eyes of law enforcement officials who had been hunting this theft ring for years, I understood that my personal fight had served a greater good. After the ceremony, I hung the plaque in my workshop beside my grandfather's old tools. Not prominently displayed, but present, a reminder of what had almost been lost. There were moments during those difficult months when giving up had seemed like the sensible choice. When the fight appeared too costly, too exhausting, too lonely. The HOA had money, influence, and the weight of official paperwork behind them. All I had was conviction and a stubborn refusal to be wronged. In the end, that was enough. To anyone facing a similar battle, whether against an HOA, a corporation, or any entity that relies on your surrender, remember this: your voice matters. Your rights are worth defending. Your land, whether literal or metaphorical, deserves protection. I stand now at the edge of my property as the sun sets, the newly planted trees casting long shadows across ground that is undeniably mine. The fence that once marked an illegal boundary is gone. The warehouse that once loomed over this space is erased. New growth covers old wounds. My land, my rules, just as my grandfather intended, just as it should be. Never let anyone tell you that your fight is too small or your voice too quiet. Sometimes, standing your ground reveals truths far larger than the land beneath your feet.